What's the weirdest rabbit hole you've ever fallen into on the internet? Story 1. The Great Glitter Mystery. There is a company in NJ that is the top glitter manufacturer in the world. When being interviewed, they were asked who their biggest client was. They refused to answer, saying they don't want people to know. Cue millions of people speculating on who the biggest glitter client in the world is and why they want to keep it secret. Story 2. I went down the rabbit hole about the Silk Road Marketplace, the illegal black market site on the deep web. I always found it fascinating that one singular dude was able to attribute so much to drug trafficking simply from his laptop. The whole story is so intriguing to me. It's actually one of the reasons I went into my current field, which is cybersecurity. The internet is such a vast and enormous place. The amount of crime that occurs simply from people's computers has always mind boggled me. Story 3. The American Chestnut Blight. What was once the redwood of the East Coast was practically wiped out in the early 20th century due to imports of trees from Asia that contained the blight fungus but were resistant. Today we have the technology to bring back the American chestnut, using minor gene modification, I believe, from wheat, but I don't believe federal approval has yet been granted to reintroduce. To me, this is a fascinating bit of science, where we have the power to bring back an almost forgotten yet iconic species. I find this an incredibly interesting topic and went down quite the rabbit hole. Story 4. Sovereign Citizens. Between the police body cam footage of traffic stops to their in-court appearances, where they try to represent themselves, my sick fascination. A part of it is quite sad because these people have made awful decisions in life. But on the other hand, they're choosing to live within delusion, and the consequences are satisfying. I shot an interview with a police officer a while back who talked about the FMOTL types. He said that they tried as hard as possible to point these people into just not doing that, but they would always decide on the worst possible course of action. Like having everyone stand around in the pissing rain while they argue that they weren't driving. They were traveling, and therefore they cannot be done for doing 50 and a 20 limit kind of thing. Story 5. The Trials game Easter Egg and Treasure Hunt. There is a series of video games that people are probably at least vaguely familiar with called Trials. It's a game in which you ride a bicycle or motorcycle from point A to point B and ride over obstacles, do flips, etc. I've never actually played it, so apologies if it's not a great description. In a nutshell, players found some items and locations in the game that seemed to be related. Someone figured out that it appeared to be a puzzle that spanned multiple versions of the game. The puzzle was wildly complicated, including things like secret websites, real-life locations across the globe, analyzing sound waves from songs, etc. The last step that was established was that someone needed to be in a specific location to receive a package in the year 2100 or something. The guy I was following who kept up on this stopped posting, and completely by chance, I saw him post here in r/askreddit. I messaged him asking what came of the puzzle, and he said life had gotten busy and he hadn't been able to keep up. But last he heard, people had been coordinating to have their kids and grandkids at the location at the specific time. It's one of the crazier things I've heard of, and probably won't hear of its resolution in my lifetime. But the rabbit hole is a fun read of seeing how things were uncovered and how in depth the puzzle is. Story 6, I have two. One is deeply researching uncontacted people and murders of people trying to contact them. You can find maps and islands, and it's just wild. Another was Peacher, okay? Drove through there on Route 66 while driving to Texas and noticed huge piles of what looked like salt and an absolute ghost town in the middle of nowhere. Turns out it was declared as a natural disaster zone, and everyone was supposed to evacuate. Some people stayed, but the big holdout was a doctor who eventually died at a somewhat young age. Story 7. Back in the early 2000s, I stumbled upon a website where the only content was this one man's Walmart receipts. He'd go shopping, then scan and upload his receipts for people to see and comment on. He'd done this for a few years by the time I found his website. I spent like 3 days looking at Walmart receipts because, after a while, they kind of started to tell a story. The guy got married, had a kid, and I left off around the time the kid was potty trained. It was like a journal written in Walmart receipts. You could follow him through the seasons, whether he had a cold, birthday cards, and gifts for family, and see the growth of his child all through his Walmart purchases. It was fascinating. Story 8. Cicada 3301 Spoilers. Pretty much a random group of unknown people were looking for geniuses to join their group of hackers or whatever. They made claims of being responsible for leaking some big things and being able to pull strings behind the scenes and so on. They made a ton of ciphers and puzzles spanning over years, and some were actually physically hidden IRL. They became increasingly more and more difficult. Some of them were insanely hard to crack. Even knowing the answer to some of them, it still blows my mind how people were able to figure it out. Some are still unsolved to this day. There is a 60-ish page book filled with hidden messages and clues, but no real answer to what or why it exists. Either way, only people that were able to solve all of them solo were selected to continue, and the puzzles stopped being made public. So there were unique tests and stuff for each individual that made it that far. This acted as a screening process because they literally only wanted the best of the best. So it came down to just a few people that ended up finishing the multi-year test. Turns out the entire thing was more or less a recruitment to a small group of people who would just chat and weren't actually doing anything. Some of the people that actually got in leaked the ciphers and puzzle solutions to get in after they had left. And even though it was a giant nothing burger, it's insane how hard some of them were to solve, and it blew my mind how smart people are to even create the cipher, let alone solve it. All for nothing, lol. Story 9. I work in dermatology. I've had a few people that would send us pictures of the threads and bugs and etc. they would dig out of their body. Had to explain more than once. You are tearing out adipose tissue and muscle. Please stop. One woman used a fish hook to dig at her face. There was no skin left on 75% of her face. Others used pliers or whatever random tools they had at their disposal. Another woman was covered head to toe with infected lesions that she would just not leave alone. No matter how many times we dressed her wounds and referred her to wound care, she would take them off as soon as she got home and resume picking. Eventually ended up in the ICU with sepsis, and I believe she passed, as we never heard from her again. Very sad to see because they get mad frustrated when you explain they need psychiatric help to manage it. We can heal the skin, but only if they curb the actual behaviors. Story 10. There's a whole set of YouTube shorts where former NBA stars talk about Larry Bird. I've probably watched hundreds of these shorts. I don't like basketball. Ooh, also, The Undertaker apparently has a podcast and makes YouTube shorts. I've watched a ton of his content too, but I've never been interested in professional wrestling. I guess I have a type. Larry Bird is such an interesting character. He's one of the greatest trash talkers in the history of the NBA, was the main player on one of the greatest dynasties in the league, had the greatest rivalry ever, and had one of the most unique reasons for retiring. He's also one of only a few people who has been successful at all three levels of the league, player, coach, and general manager. I can understand why people talking about him would be interesting. Story 11. One of my favorite books is Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. One of my favorite movies growing up was Flight of Dragons. I randomly fell down a rabbit hole and found out they are super connected. A guy wrote a fictional natural history book called The Flight of Dragons, and he was inspired to write it after reading Wizard of Earthsea because he was so curious how her dragons would maintain flight. Rabbit hole kept going, but I just found such joy in knowing a lot of the things I loved as a child were so connected. Story 12. This is back when Facebook was actual people in like 2010 or 2012 and not just bots and ads. I was still Facebook friends with some former childhood friends that we have drifted apart long ago, and now they've grown to be associated with scumbags. My favorite Sunday pastime while recovering from a hangover on the couch would be to peruse their very public craziness. One day I saw a nutty status that one of my former scumbag associates commented on, so it appeared on my feed. I decided to dive into his rabbit hole. This dude I never met's profile was dozens of posts, multiple paragraphs long that he posted rapid fire. It was like the unhinged ravings of a madman, and it was awesome. I spent like 3 hours that afternoon going through them. They included content about aliens, God, demons, government conspiracy, flat earth, crystal orbs, the power of love in the soul, you name it. Finally, I got to the first somewhat sane post that read, I paraphrase, going to try ketamine for the first time, wish me luck. I died laughing right then. It was like a 3-hour setup to one of the most amazing unintentional jokes. Story 13. Oklahoma City obituaries. This was last night when I had insomnia. Clicked on a Reddit account whose last comment was late 2022. The last couple posts were about her being old and ill, possibly it being her last Thanksgiving. She had a lot of comments to read through, a lot of Breaking Bad, animals, and her family, many little anecdotes painting a picture of who she is or was. A strange daughter in the Navy, and how she's heartbroken she doesn't even know her granddaughter's name. An adult autistic son who relied on her being a stay at home mom. Her older husband was in the military, so they had to move a lot, and how he's bad with money. She's wheelchair bound and attached to an oxygen tank, but she still wanted to get her stories out somehow. She posted frequently on the Oklahoma City subreddit and her age, so I went Googling. None of the obituaries matched up. Who knows if it's my Google skills, lack of online obituaries, or if she's still alive. At some point, I stopped searching and just kept reading through the newly deceased and whatever quirks their family members chose to reveal. All those little old ladies and where they met their husbands, a lady who loved cats despite her allergies, a MAGA supporter guy my age who liked Glee. Don't know how to feel and what I wanted to find at the end of the rabbit hole. To the random lady on the other side of the world, I hope you're okay. Story 14, Afghanistan. Not weird in the literal sense, but more so how deeply invested in it was regarding their history and the tribes, the violent uprisings, all of it. The TLDR is that they're a culture of warriors. For instance, one of their tribes, the Hazara, are descendants of Genghis Khan. Kind of helps give their history some context, as they're mainly tribes of fighters. The oddest part of it all is what set me down the rabbit hole, a random painting found in the dumpster. I'm not into art, but this one did something to me. Story 15, Operation Legacy. The British government's apparently successful ongoing operation to hide all the atrocities Britain has committed over the centuries. They were still operating concentration camps, a concept they invented, in Africa up to the 1960s. I got into it after talking to several Brits about the Irish potato famine. They learned in school that the government sent food aid and set up various support schemes to help out. That's where their education about it stops. They don't learn that those schemes were stopped after a few months, and the government switched priorities to exporting food from Ireland for the rest of the famine years. The famine went on for 7 years. After that, I looked at what they did in India and all over Africa. British people have no idea. All of it done in their name. This isn't history. The last government passed legislation to cover up what the army and security services did in Northern Ireland. The current government is under pressure from the ICC and UN and families of victims to reverse it. I'm not saying what they did was either wrong or right, but they're covering it up. So, story 16. This was like 18 years ago, so I don't recall all the details of how I got from A to 42, but I was pregnant and I worked for a podiatry office. I worked with a lot of cleaning and sanitizing products getting rooms ready, in between patients, and was worried some could be harmful to me. I started out looking up hazardous chemicals one shouldn't inhale or touch while pregnant, and of course each word was completely foreign to me, so I had to look them up individually to see what products they were used in. I came across one word, and it led me down an absolute rabbit hole because, and yes, fuzzy on all the details, it was used in production of certain things. Okay, production of what? Further down the rabbit hole, I found out this hazardous chemical was used in the making of Splenda. My ADHD brain was like, new rabbit hole. So I read up more on Splenda and found out the body can't actually break it down, and it comes out in your stool. Furthermore, it can't even be broken down after that, and, much like microplastics, can be found in waterways. Story 17. The engineering aspect of building nuclear weapons. There's probably no more useless topic to be informed about. The information is questionable and unverifiable. There is no real-world application, and it's a complex and difficult to understand topic. I strongly recommend anyone starting down this road to Google Bardcore instead, and spend time in a comparatively productive manner. Story 18. My wife once told me about this particular subset of Brazilian women who dedicate their lives to their SOs in prison. They spend all week making gigantic Tupperware buckets of food, buying snacks and supplies, that is, toothpaste and deodorant etc. Then we'll meet up with another woman and take the bus, often hours away, down to the prison to visit their partners, give them their snacks, have conjugal visits and whatever. They have to dress a certain way and bring everything in clear plastic duffel bags. It's a whole culture and even has businesses dedicated to selling clear bags and specific clothes. I spend hours on TikTok watching these guys putting together their SO's jumbo for that week. It's a whole culture and it is fascinating. They call themselves cunhadas or something. Sisters in law. Story 19. Someone on the community Facebook group mentioned how my town passed an ordinance that allows you to have backyard chickens. So I started looking at chickens to see if it might be fun to have pets. That turned to finding out there are businesses that will let you rent a chicken coop and chickens. So I went to search how many chickens you could keep in your backyard, and it turns out the ordinance says 6 chickens, ducks, or 2 pygmy goats. So that started me looking at goats and what they are like to keep as pets. I was seriously considering how to fence in the yard so we could have goats before my husband talked me down. Story 20. I used to research the evil crap common companies do in the US and overseas. Nestle is one most people are aware of nowadays, but they also own several other water mining companies disguised as local brands. I heard of one nearby crappy deal and found the water rights were handed over for a measly few $1,000 bribe. Nestle said they'd even dig us another water source, so we'd be all set. They did dig another well, but it was shoddy work and dried up almost immediately, leading to major drought in the area that persists to this day. Little corporate bait and switch. I guess it's not that weird, but I still find it weird that companies can do evil crap like this and never face anything more than a fine. They know they have the resources to say and do anything they'd like. Story 21, Underground Facebook. So I have an ex from a little before the pandemic who has a degree in computer science, and she is the most resourceful, let's say, programmer I've known. I was unaware of her talents at first, and I bailed after seeing her casually doing things that not a lot of people know how to do. Plus, she's a demon. She showed me Underground Facebook one day. I was blown away. It's Facebook, but you have to know how to type the names of the accounts to get there. And they use multiple keyboards to avoid the watchful eyes. Like, this was disturbing. There were accounts, like, for example, named like this: Hey, do you want something to read? There is some really suspicious stuff there. I think there's probably human trafficking going on. You name it. Like, you might come across a roommate advertising post and see a picture of a living room and a female miner sitting down on the sofa in the background. This was about 7 years ago. We live in a scary world, my friend. I feel uncomfortable knowing how many monsters live among us as casually stuff out in the open. Story 22. Whenever I watch a movie or TV show, I love reading up about the cast. Except that my fascination doesn't stop once the movie ends. Instead, I pick one or two cast members that I found particularly interesting and find out everything that the internet could possibly tell me about them. I'm talking about the details about their past relationships, scandals, brand deals, etc. This happens to the point where I bring these fun facts up randomly in conversations. And then when I watch another movie or TV show, it starts all over again. My current obsession is Simon Baker from The Mentalist. Story 23. Jim Jack 336. Mystery. I used to not be a fan of mysteries, especially online mysteries as a whole, until I stumbled upon the Jim Jack 336 mystery on the internet some time ago. Basically, I'll try to keep it short. A very old sim racing community, not iRacing, had a well-known community modded that helped members of the community set up groups or teams to make mods with, and he randomly disappeared one day. However, this wasn't well known back then in the community, as it was really only known upon the models themselves. Jim Jack 336 did have a Reddit account of the same name. Story 26. I needed information on pollination of a number of food-producing tree species for a novel I'm working on, and ended up discovering that avocado trees are quite weird in that their flowers are male for half of the day and female for the other half. Some cultivars' flowers are male in the morning and female in the afternoon, some the opposite. And about 2 to 2:30 p.m., you can usually get enough overlap that there are some of each on the tree. Different cultivars also flower and fruit at different times of the year, so there's a surprising amount of logistics involved if you want a novel in which a subsistence-level agrarian village has reasonably steady access to avocados. If you would like 2 avocado trees that flower and fruit near the same time and are on opposite male or female schedules so that they can pollinate each other, I recommend one bacon and one Haas. Story 27. I used to read a blog about childbirth and how dangerous home births can be. I'm not sure how I got there as I'm vehemently child-free. One of the regular commenters eventually discussed having been in a cult in the past and pointed to her own blog. Assuming her story is mostly true, she was in a tiny cult in folie à deux/trois/quatre in which the leader stated they were reincarnations of Lord of the Rings characters and of the actors from the movie. It went on, including trying to put on a convention, which failed spectacularly, with said actors actually in attendance. Eventually, the original commenter managed to escape, and the leader spiraled for a bit. Then they started again in Harry Potter fandom, based on the dark fanfic Dumbledore's Army, which they might have written themselves. It's been years and details are fuzzy. Unfortunately, they seem to be having much more success with the second cult, with a lot of very young followers, and that's where I lost track of the story. Story 28. Not me, but my husband. We had quit cigarettes for 2 weeks and should have been on the upswing. First week is the worst. We hung out with friends and smoked weed with them. It was a pre-roll. The next day, we felt like we were reset back to day one of quitting cigarettes. My husband went down a rabbit hole and found that companies are now adding chemicals to pre-rolled joints and rolling papers that are also found in cigarettes and make them addictive. These chemicals are also being added to sugary foods and alcohol,